Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are jumping straight into our source material. We're looking at some really deep pastoral reflections on one of the most, one of the most quotable verses in the New Testament.
Yeah, we're in 1 Corinthians chapter 8.
Exactly. And it gives us that famous line we're focusing on. We know that we all have knowledge, but knowledge is puffing up and only love can build up.
And that tension is just, it's everywhere, isn't it? I mean, if you're in a meeting, a debate, even just teaching your kids something, it's always there.
Absolutely. So the mission for this deep dive is to get a handle on not just the theological idea, but the really practical dynamics this creates in any community.
A faith community, a workplace, you name it.
And our sources today, they include commentary from Pastor Warren Wiersbe and some really specific observations from Pastor Hu Zikong. They help us see how to combine these two things, knowledge and love. Right,
especially when one of them, knowledge is kind of set up from the start as being inherently dangerous.
That's it. It's dangerous because of that puffing up. It's like we're immediately told that intellectual confidence on its own can lead to this deep arrogance.
Yeah, it makes you self-elevated. You start thinking you're superior just because you have the information.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Section 1, knowledge versus love. That term puffing up, it's so striking. I mean, why is knowledge, which sounds like such a good thing, so prone to creating arrogance?
Well, because knowledge is fundamentally about self. It's about knowing that I know the answer, I get the rules, I have the better perspective.
Right.
And when that isn't filtered through love, which is all about putting others first.
It just becomes a tool.
It becomes a tool for creating a hierarchy, yeah. Knowledge becomes a weapon.
So our sources get really specific about the consequences of that imbalance. What happens when you have the knowledge, but the love is missing?
Okay, so when knowledge is on its own, the material defines it as, and this is a strong phrase, cruel and ruthless.
Wow. Cruel and ruthless.
Yeah, just think about that for a second. You can be 100% correct, completely factual.
But the delivery is just brutal.
Exactly, so brutal that you actually harm the person listening. You tear down the community instead of building it up.
That's a sharp image. It's not just ineffective knowledge, it's actually malicious, even if you don't mean for it to be.
Right. It reminds me of, that person in the office who has to correct every single little thing in an email.
Oh, I know that person.
And they're always right. But they make everyone feel small in the process. That's knowledge without love.
Okay, but conversely, the sources also say the opposite is a problem too. Love without any knowledge.
Yes. If you're just operating on love, but you don't have a foundation of, truth or knowledge, that compassion risks becoming hypocritical.
Hypocritical, how so?
Because it's well-meaning, but it can ring hollow. It's easily misled because it has no substance behind it. You're just being nice without offering any real guidance.
So you end up doing a disservice because you're avoiding the hard facts or the necessary teaching just to keep things pleasant.
Exactly. The material is really clear on this. The only way forward is for love and knowledge to run side by side, in tandem.
Knowledge gives you the foundation, the truth.
And love gives you the method and the motive. You need substance, but delivered with kindness.
That integration is so hard to pull off. Which brings us, I think, very naturally to the next section, how this plays out in a community between the strong and the weak.
Yeah, and this is a tricky area because our first instinct about who is strong is often wrong.
How so?
Well, we assume strong means the people with the most rules, but the sources define the weak first. And the weak are the people who rely very heavily on regulations, on legalistic structure.
Okay, so they need a rule book for everything.
They do, and it's often because they're afraid of using the spiritual freedom they actually have. The rules feel safer.
If you stick that rigidly to rules, you're bound to come into conflict with people who are more freewheeling. The strong.
Correct. And that's where the weak become prone to judging. They see the liberty that the strong are using, maybe in what they eat or how they spend their time, and they stumble over it. They criticize it.
Because from their perspective, the strong are breaking the rules of safety.
Exactly. They see it as a threat. Their focus shifts from regulating themselves to trying to regulate everyone else, and it's all driven by fear, not faith.
I see. So the strong aren't defined by having a lot of rules. They're defined by their confidence in their spiritual liberty. But the second they use that liberty,
they risk tripping up the weak. And that is the core challenge. This is where love becomes the absolute highest duty for the strong person.
Okay.
The sources say the strong have to use their knowledge with love, which means putting the weak person's journey first. It means you might have to voluntarily limit your own freedom.
You're sacrificing your own rights for the sake of someone else's growth.
That's it. And that's a huge demand.
So if the strong can actually do that, what's the outcome? What happens to the weaker members?
They get pulled along. The knowledge, when it's delivered with that kind of humility and patience, helps the weak person to finally stand up and eventually walk in that same freedom themselves.
But without love, the knowledge just pushes them further into their corner.
Right, it just becomes one more reason for them to retreat back into legalism and judgment.
There's a metaphor the sources use here that is so powerful. It says you can't feed immature believers in a harsh, rigid way and expect them to suddenly become spiritual giants.
No, you can't force feed maturity. If you lead with that, that cruel, ruthless knowledge we talked about with no heart,
You get what?
you get the person the sources describe as having a big head but no broad, trusting heart, the intellectual bully.
I think we've all met that person. They know everything, but they have zero capacity for patience or humility.
Yes. They can state the truth perfectly, but they have absolutely no grace for anyone who's struggling to get it.
It really is the difference between the teacher who makes you want to learn more and the one who just makes you feel stupid for even asking a question.
One builds up, the other just puffs up their own ego. It's a perfect parallel.
And this isn't just theory. It plays out in really tangible ways, which leads us to this fascinating case study from Pastor Hu Shikhan.
Right, so he poses this very simple, almost logistical question from his own subjective observation.
The question is, who is more often late for Sunday service? Is it first-generation Christians, people who convert as adults, or is it those from traditional, multi-generational Christian families?
It seems like such a minor thing to look at, right? But the answer he observed is so revealing. He found that the traditional Christians were late at a much higher rate.
That's completely counterintuitive.
It is?
You'd think the group that grew up with it, where it's part of their family rhythm, would be the most punctual.
Yeah.
So why are the first-generation converts more zealous?
The sources suggest it's because they see their faith as something they had to fight for. It was difficult to attain. Maybe they struggled against family expectations or their own doubts.
So when they finally get this new life, as the source calls it, they cherish it.
They cherish it deeply. It's a profound, hard-won acquisition. So you see that enthusiasm in everything. Their attitude in worship, how diligently they take notes, their willingness to serve and give. It's all fresh and valuable to them.
Okay, so let's contrast that with the traditional group. What are the root causes for that difference in zeal?
Well, the big trap for the traditional member is familiarity.
It just becomes routine.
Exactly. They grow up with the language, the rituals, the motions, they know it all. But if they didn't get a really solid foundation when they were young, they can just ghost.
So just showing up feels like enough.
Right. The knowledge they have isn't an active living conviction, it's just rote familiarity.
The source material has a great analogy for this. It says the traditional Christian might feel like they got into the best school without ever having to take an exam.
Yes, they just relied on the grace of their family legacy. They inherited the name, but they didn't have to go through the struggle.
And that lack of a test, a struggle, is critical. It means their understanding might stay pretty shallow.
It does. They know the highlight reel, the Good Samaritan and the prodigal son, but they might lack that deeper engagement that only comes from wrestling with the truth yourself.
So they never gain the humility that comes from that moment of realization where you think, I was a sinner, and yet I was accepted.
Precisely. And that brings it right back to the strong versus weak dynamic. The sources suggest that those who came to faith through that process of realizing their own need,
Like many first-gen converts.
they often end up being the more tolerant and broad-minded believers. They're less likely to be judgmental because, well, they walked that difficult path themselves.
Their knowledge is filtered through the humility of their own experience. It keeps it from puffing up.
That's a perfect way to put it. Humility is the filter that turns sharp knowledge into gentle wisdom.
Okay, so let's bring this all together into some final applications. We need to avoid those two spiritual extremes, right?
Yes, the sources warn against both inferiority and arrogance. Whether you're leading a team at work or just parenting your kids, a solid foundation needs both wisdom, knowledge, and love.
If you lean into inferiority, you fail to share what you know.
And if you fall into arrogance, you share it in a way that does more harm than good.
And that puts a huge responsibility on the leader, the teacher, the mentor, anyone sharing knowledge.
A twofold responsibility, really. First, you can't become a leader with knowledge but no love. We've established that just leads to ruthlessness.
You can't just be a walking encyclopedia.
Exactly. And second, you can't be a leader who only preaches love but avoids the difficult truths. That just leads to hypocrisy, to a foundation that's shallow and can't hold up.
So the mission then is to teach truth humbly and to encourage behavior that reflects that, to be both factually right and relationally secure.
That's the synthesis. And I think the takeaway for you listening is that any kind of knowledge, spiritual, intellectual, whatever, it only truly builds people up when it's filtered through love.
So our insights are used to help others rise, not just to prove that we're competent.
Right. It's about building the community, not just your own ego.
That is a phenomenal summary of a really demanding tension. It requires constant self-awareness. Thank you for guiding us through this.
It's always a pleasure. And maybe as you walk away from this deep dive, you can think about the final question that the pastoral reflection left us with.
What's that?
Think about a specific time when someone combined love and knowledge perfectly to help you become stronger. What specific action did they take? Maybe it was a patient correction or a hard truth delivered with incredible gentleness. And then ask yourself, how can you replicate that exact action for someone else in your life this week?
That's where the knowledge becomes active. A powerful challenge to leave us with. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.